the University of Heidelberg. Dhamika's area of research happens to be Buddhism and its political use. Since in the morning we got to know about Sufi Bangla literature and about the Baul philosophy and different facets and dimensions of it. This is now the opportunity for all of us to, as I said in the morning, to widen the frame further and to know more about the Buddhist aspect of the entire dialogue, which we call the intercultural dialogue among different thought geographies. So without wasting further time, Dhamika, your time begins now. It will be grateful if you can stop at around 4:05 Indian Standard Times. Does it work for you? Fine?
Yes, Professor Ninja, it will work for me.
Thank you. Over to you.
Okay, I guess everyone can hear me, is that right?
Yes, yes.
All right. Okay, so let me begin by saying that I'm indeed very grateful to have this invitation to talk at the annual meeting of the Post-Colonial Studies Association of the Global South. Especially, I would like to thank Professor Anindya Sekar Kayashat. Sorry if I pronounce it badly. And Professor Pavan Malreddy, who actually introduced me to Professor Anindya. So thank you very much to both of you, and of course to all the participants. My talk today is on the politicization of Buddhism in Sri Lanka and the question of peace and development. The post-colonial Sri Lankan polity fashioned out a kind of democracy modeled after a glorified cultural past, with the emphasis on collective actions. Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, each emphasized collective actions within an ethnic/religious boundary. Now, these collective actions involved a collective consciousness with a background or with a backward or return to past kind of orientation, which is quite unique to any nationalist movement. Now, and they were highly ethnocentric. In this talk, I'm going to engage with one strand of such collective consciousness, that is Sinhala Buddhist nationalism, and how it has impacted Sri Lanka's liberal democracy, and how in turn it has had a very strong impact or implications on the questions of peace and development. The protagonists in my talk today involve the Buddhist Sangha, which is a term used to include the order of monks, the entire order of monks in Sri Lanka. Of course, there are many fraternities, but the Sangha is a collective term which is used to describe everyone in saffron robes. Now, like many Southeast and South Asian societies, the historical relationship between Buddhism and the state in Sri Lanka was intimate and complex. But Sangha, that is the order of monks, never imposed itself as an autonomous determinant force in the existing political framework, or as an alternative form of political structure, as Silver pointed out. Rather, as the famous anthropologist S.J. Thambaya has stated, there was, I quote, an integral yoking of religion and polity, of Sangha and kinship. End of quote. This means the state and Sangha was always connected ever since the introduction of Buddhism in Sri Lanka. And these institutions have had more or less mutually beneficial relationship in most of history, except in some turbulent periods. So this means that the Sangha benefited from the relationship with the king or the state in later period, and then the king or the state or the government benefited having Sangha, keep the Sangha in a good relationship, in a mutually beneficial relationship. Buddhism's contribution, as is well known to Sri Lanka society, is very important. um, its political stability, economy, and culture, they all benefited from the introduction of Buddhism. So the contribution of Buddhism cannot be underestimated. But I'm not going to get into the rich anthropological history now, but today I will focus a bit on the colonial history, but more actually on the contemporary Sri Lanka. The historians and anthropologists have been critical towards the institution of Sangha, especially its political engagement since political independence in 1948. Scholars have called these monks with overt political involvement as political monks. So this term political monks is important in scholarly literature about Buddhism in Sri Lanka. Nevertheless, political monks have a longer history depending on how one is prepared to define politics. Monks were part of the leftist movement, for example, the leftist political parties, and they were also connected with the trade union movement around the same time. And then, at political independence and its aftermath, political activism by monks sparked an intense debate around the propriety of monks' political engagement. For example, Valpula Rahula, he was one of Sri Lanka's most well-known scholar monks in the recent past, of course. Now, Valpula Rahula vehemently asserted that political activism of monks transcended self-interest and therefore is consistent with monastic traditions. Now, this was a very significant statement because it was a rejection of a call to depoliticize Buddhism from the politicians. The politicians of the day actually were some of them were calling to depoliticize, but Rahula rejected this outrightly. Now, this was a time, for example, around 1950s. This was a time which saw a vigorous rise of ethno-nationalism in Sri Lanka, partly due to its active mobilization by late Prime Minister W.R.D. Bandaranaike. Then, throughout 1960s, 70s, it remained the same more or less, and in the 1980s also witnessed the rise to prominence of individual monks like Madhulavi Sobita and later Gangudevilla Som, who characteristically inspired a whole generation of new political monks. Now, at this stage, I think a qualifier will also be necessary right at the outset. It would be grossly inaccurate to claim that the entire Buddhist establishment in Sri Lanka is in politics. Certainly not. It is only a small minority of monks who directly engage with political parties, who active politics, while the great majority of monks confine themselves to their routine monastic life. But since this great majority is a silent majority, the minority of political monks have been able to be so conspicuous and powerful and influential within Sri Lanka's social landscape. Tambaya's iconic book, just published in 1992, Buddhism Betrayed, asserted that with greater politicization, he used a particular term called genuine Buddhism. He said, I quote here, genuine Buddhism had transformed into something fundamentally different from its original form and content. Tabaya argued that political Buddhism was radically different from localized religiosity manifested by Dhamma teachings and almsgiving. It demonstrated vocal and sloganized religious mindedness. End of quote. Now, which objectified and fetishized religion and espoused what he called Buddhist nationalism. Now, he asserted that with the rise of Buddhist nationalism, soteriological, ethical, and normative components of Buddhism were weakened, displaced, and even distorted. End of quote. In their work on Buddhism Transformed, Gombrich and Obesekara, two other prominent anthropologists from Sri Lanka, Obesekara was from Sri Lanka actually, and now they also had this notion of a genuine Buddhism. I use the term within commas, Buddhist. And now they argued that Buddhism transformed itself from its original form, and it deviated from canonical Buddhism. Nevertheless, this view of a genuine Buddhism disconnected from politics has been questioned, given the historic relationship between the polity and religion. Now, this brings us into an important question. What is the proper relationship between religion and politics? Western secularism underpins the belief that religion and politics are and should be kept strictly separate. But the German philosopher Johann Fichte asserted that, I quote, a withdrawal from the affairs of the state and the nation as the hallmark of a true religious disposition is a gross misuse of religion, end of quote. Now, as Talal Asad also has argued, the Western interpretations of the secular saw no public role for religion in state affairs, but religions like Islam and in our case Buddhism always had a public role. So there is this constructed dualism between the political and the secular, or religion and politics. Now these have been replicated in viewing the Indian politics as well, as Dumont has documented. But in Hindu-Buddhist societies, as both Sachs and Rahela and people like that have pointed out, in Hindu-Buddhist societies, classical kingdoms in South and Southeast Asia, they were based on a unitary concept of power in which religion and politics are not radically distinguished. It doesn't mean that religion and politics were the same. There was a boundary between these two. There were distinctions, but they were intricately connected as well. Now, in the Western society as well, despite Western secularism, religion and state was not separate. The church and the state was intricately connected and perhaps had the same sort of relationship as that existed in the whole of South Asia. Even now, the United Kingdom Parliament has representations from the church. So therefore, this tension between polity and religion has somewhat of a universal character. Now, with history behind us, Sangha's involvement in state affairs is nothing new. But what I'm arguing is that what is new is that there is a dramatic expansion. There is a dramatic expansion of the role of Sangha in state and politics within the last 2 decades, and this has had important implications for democracy, peace, and development in Sri Lanka. For my studies, I have conducted hundreds of case studies with monks and Buddhist movements, but today I will just bring maybe 1 or 2 case studies to illustrate how monks have increased their scope of influence. This basically means that although the majority of Sangha remains within their monastic boundary, the minority of political monks have expanded their influence in society in areas where they were not seen before much. The first case I take here comes from a movement called Sinhala Ravaya. This is a radical movement, but I'll keep the name of the monk anonymous for now. He has used mass media widely as one of his tools to engage with the Buddhist public and the government. A close study of his media appearance. So his main tool actually has been to use media, mass media. And so this is a new development in a way. So, and his mass media appearances give us a fantastic overview of Sangha's expanded role in society. Let me take several examples. I have analyzed many of his press briefings. In the first conference that I cite in my paper, he remarks about the cost of living and goes into great strength in describing how cost of certain products and services have dramatically increased. For example, he explains that the price of 10 millimeter and 20 millimeter iron bars have increased. School van hires have increased. He says salaries have not increased, and so on and so forth. He talks about the textile industry, shortage of fur, significance of forex in Sri Lanka, and so on. He also talks about price of kerosene oil, how Tamil laborers in upcountry plantations suffer as a ticket, and so on and so forth. He demands the government to set the economy on the correct path. In the same press conference, he moves to talk about corruption and the need of audit assets. And he talks about money printing by the central bank. Now, remember, these are strictly economic matters. But he talks about money printing and how it has impacted on inflation in Sri Lanka and so on and so forth. See, he also criticizes the Rajapaksa government for miscalculated calculated investment projects and so on and so forth. In the second conference that I have analyzed with him, he talks about the appointment of Ranil Wickremesinghe as the new prime minister at that time, and also about tourism industry, travel advisories by Western governments, and so on. He then talk about inequality before the law, and he talks about different cases before courts of law in Sri Lanka, and explain that the law is not equal. So this is the legal matter that he's talking about. He talks about sexual abuses of young girls by minister, and then he talks about punishment given to sexual abuses in Sri Lanka and so on and so forth. And he says that the law should be strengthened and punishments against sexual abuses should be increased and so on. Now it is interesting here that that he emphasizes on punishment, law and punishment, over and above moral education, which he can command as a bhikkhu. Such as, for example, and then he discloses that he also intervened personally as an influential monk with the police officers. He called the police officers to implement the law. So he calls senior police officers and asks them to implement the law. Then, interestingly, a journalist takes him to express his view about privatization of university sector in Sri Lanka, and he talks about the KDU bill, the privatization of university bill in Sri Lanka. And he makes his comments that privatization is necessary and beneficial for Sri Lanka's education. So, and then in some other press conferences, he talks about COVID-19 and so on and so forth. So you can see that in a few press conferences, this monk tries to touch over many areas of lay life or expert areas where he doesn't have any expertise or knowledge. Let me quickly move on to my second case study. This involves a scholar monk in Sri Lanka. He's a professor. I would keep the name anonymous for now. In this case, there was a school textbook in Sri Lanka about sex education. It was called Hate Ape Potha. Now, so this literally means that our book of the 7th graders. This was compiled by a group of experts, including psychiatrists from University of Peradeniya and then other educationists, school teachers, and so on. Now, it was included into the grade 7 curriculum in all 3 languages used in Sri Lanka. However, some of the monks led by this scholar launched a campaign to get the book out of the school curriculum, and they succeeded in doing that. And they argued that the sex education book encourages students to experiment with sex and immoral behavior. And so the monks were able to take a book on sexual education out of the school curriculum. The government had to buckle under their pressure. The expert advice was discarded. The psychiatrist, educationists insisted that this is necessary, and lack of sex education leads to sex abuses and so on, teenage pregnancies and so on. But the Minister of Education took the book out of the school curriculum. And so on health issues, monks have influenced. For example, some of the monks have influenced COVID-19 problem, like they spoke about different vaccinations, different vaccines, how different COVID variants interact with different vaccines, and they asked the government initially not to vaccinate children and so on and so forth. So now the social power of a monk allows them to interfere or intervene in many areas of lay life. And this has had important implications on government policy in many areas of life. So if we come back to the question of relationship between religion and state, now you see that these political monks have gone much beyond the public role that Talal Asad had envisioned in the case of Islam, or the unitary concept of power in Indian politics that anthropologists have also shown. Propriety or the suitability of monks to involve in politics has been a point of contention from the time of Buddhist kings in Sri Lanka. Now, within the context of the 20th and 21st century, this debate has continued. For example, as I mentioned, Valpura Rahula, the famous scholar monk, argued in one of his books, I quote, "In an organized society, no human being socially conspicuous, who understand right and wrong, who is responsible can stay away from politics." So this is Valpura Rahula, who argued that monks need to involve in politics. He continued, I quote here, "Politics is not the result of Takadiya." Takadiya means something like a thug, or a battleground, or theft as some have claimed. It is a great service for the benefit of the world by great people with clean, honest, and silver character. So silver means a pious character. So he didn't see Valpala Rahula, the scholar monk didn't see politics as necessarily or inherently bad, and that he said monks should have a role in it. When anthropologists such as Gombrich and Obesekara spoke about Protestant Buddhism, it was assumed that the laity, Buddhist laity, would have greater influence and would undercut the role of the monk, because the Buddhist laity would have greater expertise in many areas of life compared to the past. Where in the past, the monks were the literati or monks were the scholars, but it is no longer the case now. But however, now 20th century and 21st century have seen that the monks have obtained or gained significant power even over some of the lay scholars. Now, this is an important development in the case of Sri Lanka. It is interesting to find that some of these political monks who profusely use mass media never refuse to answer any of the questions posed to them, even if these questions fall outside the perimeter of a monk. They often hold press conferences, and these press conferences are highly informative in illustrating how some of the political monks have widened and deepened their influence and scope of engagement. It is not important whether they possess the expertise or experience, or whether they are genuine or disingenuous. What is interesting for me is that these monks have constructed a new role for themselves in Sri Lanka society as a class of expert advisors who can virtually speak about anything or perhaps everything, and even demand the government to listen. An interesting observation can be made about the media culture as well. For example, the journalists who persuade the monks to answer these questions, which they know that fall outside of the scope of a monk. Now, are they genuine? Do they genuinely believe that the answer those questions posed to them, or do they manipulate the gullible monks to fulfill their own political agendas or agendas of the mass media owners? Now, these are important questions that we also have to ask. Or are the journalists also caught up in this very special sociological environment in which monks have become so conspicuous and powerful that they are seen as having a natural right to intervene in the society? The journalists shoot well-designed questions in expectation of anticipated answers. On the other hand, experts from the universities and professionals have also held hundreds of press conferences. But now these press conferences do not receive the same or adequate attention from mass media. Media has attributed radical Buddhist movements such as BBS, Sinhala Ravaya, or Ravana Balaya much greater political authority or clout than they can wield. Moreover, the journalists ask about Mahasangha's satisfaction about the performance of the government with two implicit assumptions. Firstly, the Sangha was a powerful factor in bringing the incumbent government to power. Secondly, if the government fails to deliver the electoral promises it made, the Mahasangha has the moral authority or even an obligation to do something about it. So that is the belief even in the mass media. The depth and the breadth of the power that mass media attributes to the order of Sangha is simply astonishing. Now, in the recent past, the government as well as the main opposition had to alter key decisions about potential political alliances with minority parties, retaining the executive presidency or getting rid of it, pause for reconciliation, holding provincial council elections and also local government elections and so on and so forth. And there was constant influence from the political monks regarding these questions. Their influence mattered. Now, these were matters strictly connected with democratic governance. So these political monks have influenced policies, practices related to economy, health, education, investment, development, law, and reconciliation, and many other areas. So political monks as well as Sangha in general made a game-changing influence in the elections in 2019 and 2020 to bail out a particular dynasty, political dynasty. So probably after 1956, the two elections in 2019 and 20 stand out as the elections whose results were largely determined by various monks. Arguably, these were also the turning points which have had the most regressive impact on Sri Lanka's democracy. This makes one wonder whether Sangha, who has made a historic contribution to build civilization and culture of Sri Lanka from 3rd century BCE, has also contributed to its worst economic, social, and political crisis after independence. Because the political monks have largely influenced Sri Lanka's inability to engage with post-war reconciliation, make important economic decisions, investment decisions, and of course, the most important question of power devolution. By these, the minority of political monks have made a very strong impact on the question of peace and development in Sri Lanka society. During 2018 and 21 period, this minority of political monks could almost capture larger than life portion of news time in Sri Lanka's television networks. It seemed as if they had to be consulted for every important decision. Now, this hampered the ability of the state to undertake important reforms in many sectors of the economic policy and social policy. It was not that the state was captured, but the state benefited from this relationship as it could postpone these questions when the more emotional questions occupied public attention. So, but I should not end with a totally pessimistic note, because I should also point out that monks have also contributed to democratic gains. For example, in the recent past, monks such as Madhulave Sobhita, those who are familiar with Tambaya's anthropologist Tambaya's work. Now, in his book Madhulave Sobhita, he figures the front cover of his famous book Buddhism Betrayed, which was initially banned in Sri Lanka. Now, he was the vital force, perhaps the most important force in defeating the Rajapaksa government and bringing Jahapanan government in 2015. And there are other monks such as Omar Sobhita who have vigorously supported the abolition of executive presidency and also the 21st Amendment to the Constitution in October 2022. So monks have also contributed to democratic gains, but there are minority of political monks who are influential, very influential, who have influenced key economic and social decisions. However, now one also wonders whether the heyday of the political monks is over now. So much has changed in Sri Lanka within the last 1 year or so. With the Aragalaya, much has changed, and nationalist movements have a bigger challenge now to convince the public in Sri Lanka. So we begin to wonder whether the heyday of this political or nationalist monks is now over, which will be good if that happens, or whether they will have to renegotiate their position, especially with regard to the present social media accusations of a great moral decline. People talk about a moral decline within the order of Sangha. So if that happens to be the case, this will be after 200 years that people talk of a moral decline. And so this will be a question that the order of Sangha will have to deal with in the next few years. And that discussion, that public discussion, will frame how Sri Lanka democracy will come out, or whether Sri Lanka democracy will come out, and whether this will lead to a vibrant and democratic society where we can genuinely engage with important questions that have a bearing on peace and development in Sri Lanka. So with this, I would like to end my talk. I think I have uh, ended exactly in 30 minutes as Professor Nindya requested me. So once again, I would like to thank Professor Nindya and also Professor Malreddy for making this, making my talk possible. And I would be happy to answer any questions if you do have. So thank you once again.
Uh, Thank you. We thank Dr. Dhamika Herath for his observation on the politicization of Buddhism in Sri Lanka. I have a couple of questions, but before I go to those questions, I'd like to invite others if they have questions for Dhamika. Maitra, you have any question? Okay. Anyone else? Okay. So if I can begin with my queries, a couple of small queries about the political use of Buddhism, as you mentioned throughout your talk. I was thinking about the recent crisis in Sri Lanka, and I thought of asking this: that what was the role of the monks during this? Because I think when this economic problem was unfolding in Sri Lanka in recent months, we were all scared and apprehensive about the future of Sri Lanka. There was large scale uncertainty looming around. So it would be interesting to know about their role at that time. And what about their position towards the minorities? For example, we all know about the dispute with the Tamils in Sri Lanka. So, what is their approach and position as far as the Tamils in Sri Lanka are concerned? And you talked about the question of peace and development, which was part of your talk also, and you said that they have contributed in deepening the democratic process. Now, I think this elicits the question that I don't know what's the system in Sri Lanka. Is Buddhism a part of the official religion, or the Sri Lankan constitution doesn't mention any religion as such as part of the official policy towards religion? I mean, it would be good to know from you as far as the constitutional approach to religion is concerned in Sri Lanka. Over to you.
Thank you, Professor Anindya, for your interesting questions. Now, the first question, what did the monks do with regard to the recent, we call it Aragalaya, the political struggle by pro-democracy activists in Sri Lanka against the authoritarian regime of the time, and also against the rise of cost of living and shortage of essential items and so on. When this Aragalaya, or the struggle, gathered phase, when hundreds of thousands of people gathered to Colombo, some of the political monks who supported the incumbent regime tried to delegitimize the Aragalaya. They still try to do. However, Aragalaya was important in questioning nationalism or religionism. And because on the goal face green, that which was the main site for the conflict, people held, interestingly, vigils for people who died in the war, and that was unthinkable before that event. 2 weeks prior to that event, this was unthinkable to hold a vigil to commemorate the people who died in the war, everyone who died in the war, and that was unthinkable to have that held in Colombo. So Arakalaya youth, they questioned nationalism, and they openly called out that we were fooled, that nationalists managed to fool us to vote for a particular regime, to cover up corruption, to cover up mismanagement, and so on. So some of the, I call them minorities still. Some of these politicians tried to delegitimize the struggle and support the government, but they failed actually. So what happens was some of the monks who constituted the large part of the silent majority of monks, they joined the struggle. So from their silence, they broke their silence. They came to Colombo. Some of these influential monks also came to Colombo, and they supported the youth movement. It is not necessarily youth, but it involved people of all walks of life, all ages of life, and they supported this movement. So they played a key role in supporting this struggle. And as to your second question, the approach towards minorities, and as I said, one of the consequences, we don't know whether this is long term or medium term or short term, but at least at the time it showed that people were coming out and questioning nationalism, and this holding of the vigil of for those who died in the war also. Now these were very significant with regard to approach towards minorities, because it showed that there's a softening of approach towards the political questions, towards the minorities, towards people who died in the war, and so on and so forth. So this is really important. This is a important development which will contribute to reconciliation in Sri Lanka if that trend remains. But I don't know whether this is going to remain the same, because Aragalaya is no longer there. With regard to your third question on the position of Buddhism in Sri Lanka, yeah, it is part of the state. It is part of the constitution. The constitution state that the Buddhism should be protected and defended. So that is there. But I don't think that the constitution or the constitutional clause is or it has a significant impact on how life unfolds practically. There is a lot we can do without touching the constitution, because as an anthropologist, I don't want to have more problems than we have. So trying to change this will actually aggravate a problem. But I think there are many other things we can do on the ground. So that would be my position.
Okay. Yes. Can I ask Becky? It would be good if you have the question here.
মাইকে বলবো
ওটা এখানে আসলে সুবিধা
Anindya, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Have another
Yeah,
question.
okay.
ভিডিওটাকে অন করে দিতে পারেন ভিডিওটা
Thank you, Professor Hirit. Actually, I've been mulling over the thing when you mentioned
ভিডিওটা অন
the
করে
silent majority among monks, while the minority were vocal and active. But after this particular conversation between Anindya and you, the thing actually came to my mind, what I should ask formally like that. Now, I was just wondering whether is the kind of a silent majoritarianism always the back to make the majoritarianism vocal, like what we see in our country right now. perhaps there is a subterranean silent majoritarianism. What you are seeing among the monks can also be seen among the laity. But what, particularly for the monks, since they're organized, and in Buddhism, that organized religion was from the very beginning with the Sangha tradition. Though they were organized for peace, obviously, initially, and even now, I think that the pan-Buddhist, the world of Buddhism, I hope that they are for peace, not for any kind of violence. But whatever it is, when the violence erupts, sometimes in Myanmar, sometimes in Sri Lanka, any other place, and when Buddhism is somehow in some place that Buddhism is, we are afraid that there's some role about some monks at least, maybe there's minority. Anyway, then putting the thing right in a kind of right manner, whether that silent minoritarianism and silent majoritarianism is theoretically connected with the minority who were not silent and never been silent, and whether Buddhism has some got particular what should I say, ballast to deliver with their Sangha tradition. Can you throw some light upon that? Can we see some light from Buddhist tradition? But Sangha tradition was very old. I'm sorry if I have not put it in a very lucid manner, but I hope that I can convey you. Is it?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much for this very interesting question. Sri Lanka's democracy is a majoritarian democracy, and it has been the case from the very beginning, because it doesn't have constitutional provisions or constitutional checks and balances, for example, like in Switzerland. So we don't have those kinds of checks and balances right now in the present constitution to safeguard minorities if there is a regression of their democratic rights. So it is by definition a majoritarian democracy. Although of course we have ratified the United Nations Human Rights Charters, and the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka is responsible for judging any violation of human rights. But the fact that from a cultural perspective, the majoritarian consciousness has been part of Sri Lanka, because what happens is during times of conflict, I think nationalists from both sides of the spectrum, the Sinhala Buddhist nationalists and also Tamil nationalists, they have been, trying to go back, as I mentioned in my talk also, with a return to past orientation. And this has happened in both camps, Sinhala Buddhist nationalism and also Tamil nationalism. And these nationalisms have had a dialectical relationship. They feed each other during times of conflict. That's what happened. So the Sinhala Buddhist majority and Sangha, of course, which is part of this population, have had this influence from this majority consciousness. So what happens is that culturally this is reinforced through school textbooks, through art and culture, through history writing, and so on and so forth. And so this consciousness is reinforced, and this is recreated, and children learn about it. So even the young monks who join the order, acquire this consciousness. The only way, whether they can get rid of this tradition, or whether the Sangha can then think in new ways and support the reconciliation process, is an important question. But the positive side of the present situation is that, as I mentioned, because so much is changing, Sri Lanka society is transforming itself. Due to the crisis, people have begun to question the two mainstream political parties. I think they have a serious challenge now. The two mainstream political parties will have a serious challenge in the next few elections to maintain their hold on the public, because many of the assumptions with which they went to elections in the previous times have now been broken by the struggle, by this recent struggle. So with this, and where Sangha or the Buddhist monks were also part of this, we believe that there is a possibility of thinking in new ways, thinking or looking at from the conflict from a different angle. And you see in Sri Lanka now, more and more monks actually are talking about it. They question nationalism, they question religionism openly, not only in the cities, but also in my study I have found monks from very rural areas, because they have access to social media. They post to social media with their speeches, questioning nationalism, questioning religionism, and the fact that they mentioned that, okay, we also voted for this government, but we were fooled, we were cheated. So you can find hundreds of media posts by village monks on media. So I see that there's a trend in Sri Lanka by the Buddhist monks also to question many of the old assumptions. I think this has opened up, and this will continue to open up um, a more vibrant space for us to engage with important questions such as power devolution or and reconciliation. So I hope that I have answered your question.
Is there any other question? Anyone? Okay, so thank you, Dhamika, for your answer. I think, as far as I could see, there is.
Want to thank from me also.
Yeah, so Subhendra, who asked the question, also thank you for the answer.
Thank you.
Yeah, so before we conclude, if you allow me, there is an institution called the Mahabodhi Society.
Yes,
whose
yes.
headquarters is in Kolkata, but it was established in Colombo initially.
Yeah.
So,
Yes, yes.
listening, and even I could see when we visited the Mahabodhi Society for archival work, that I could see pictures of President Rajapaksa visiting India to participate in some of the programs organized by the Mahabodhi Society. So I'd be really interested to know that this institution, which appears to be more cosmopolitan in their approach to Buddhism and to other cultural practices, do they still have any presence in Sri Lanka, or do you see it separate from the monk associations, or they're part of the larger Buddhist collective there in Sri Lanka? Or, I mean, in the Chicago World Religious Congress, where Vivekananda participated from India to speak about the Hindu religion, Sangakara Dharmapala, who was the pioneering, founder of the Mahabodhi Society, he represented Buddhism. But we do not talk much about him. So I'm really interested to know more about this man and the presence of the Mahabodhi Society in Sri Lanka. Are they still active there?
To the best of my knowledge, Mahabodhi Society is not active in Sri Lanka, or it is not active in the political landscape. And I have not seen within the last several years any statement or any intervention by Mahabodhi Society with any of the important questions. So my answer would be no. I have not seen any engagement of that society in Sri Lanka, except their routine monastic or other engagements, I suppose.
Okay, so if there is no other question, with that note, Dhamika, we thank you once again for taking time out and for your participation today. And if we have further queries, we can definitely exchange our views through our email conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you.
Okay, so I don't have a very good news as far as Dalpat's speech is concerned. We're really sorry. Dalpat missed his transit flight, got delayed, and he arrived at Jodhpur. He tried his level best. We have been in touch throughout, but he's now in a rural area in Jodhpur. He informed me in the morning that they have a power cut and still they couldn't fix it properly. So he's not in a position to connect. So we are really sorry that we'll be missing Dalpat's speech this time. But we hope that the conversation will continue and we'll have occasions to hear from Dalpat in future. So with that, we come to a close, and formally I would invite my colleague, Dr. Murshid Alam, who is part of the PSAGS and who is also part of the Ambedkar Center for Social and Cultural Studies, who is one of the partner institutes in organizing this event, to make the concluding motion.
Thank you, Professor Purkayastha. I think we had a wonderful day of philosophical, theological, and poetic journey. Officially, it ends here, but the dialogue will continue. But before I, thank the persons involved in making this event a success, 2-3 points from our end. First, this year's conference has been truly global south oriented. We had speakers and scholars from and focused on global south. So that has been something important for us also. When you organized this conference, keeping in the mind the objective of PSAGS, we wanted to focus on what the global south can offer to the world, okay, in the world of ideas, and our speakers very well have proved that we have a lot to offer to the world in terms of thoughts and ideas. For example, there have been a lot of scholarly discussion going on the origin and translation of Islam outside the Arabian Peninsula, and Aisha Ji's talk, makes me to question, to put before you a question: how Islam would look like if it is viewed or imagined from South Asia or Southeast Asia, where most of the Muslims live. So those questions, I think, will further open up ideas and areas of cross discussion and cross fertilization. And as we are well aware, the world is going through a very difficult time, a sort of crisis. The world is facing this rise of religious nationalism, ethno-nationalism, and as Shokinath Babu has shown brilliantly, that how these divergent thought geographies can actually work as a sort of antidote to this ethno-nationalism, this majoritarianism. So a second or third point, we wanted to focus on the divergent, or rather the resistive thought geographies of South Asia, and two issues we had. One, we not only wanted to map those divergent thought geographies, we also wanted to see how they can speak to us today. And it is very much evident that those divergent thought traditions are very much alive, and they can offer us some sort of path future path to tackle the problems that we are having, in India, not only in India, in across the world. Okay, so that intercultural dialogue as an antidote to the rising ethno-nationalism, that perhaps is one idea that we can take back from here. Third point, as Professor Dhamika talked about, how the social power of the monks is leading to the politicization of Buddhism. Same thing we are witnessing here. I need not to mention what is going on, what some organizations are doing. So and how they are capitalizing and cashing on that social power and politicizing on religion here. So as Professor Dhamika also mentioned, that let us continue the dialogue. There should be public discussions. So let us take these ideas from here, and let us germinate these ideas, those ideas of divergent thought traditions, of intercultural dialogue in the public forum, and let us create that sort of public reason, as Amartya says, so that democracy does not dwindle into majoritarian democracy. Now, as every conference ends, I'd like to end by thanking all the persons who were involved in organizing this conference. Let me first thank our eminent speakers. So I would like to thank Aisha D, or Professor Aisha A. Irani, Professor, University of Massachusetts, Boston, for her wonderful talk, and congratulate her on her path-breaking research on a neglected area of research in Bengal studies, or on Bengal studies. Let me also thank, I think no thanks is enough, to Professor Satyanath Jha for taking us through a subversive philosophical melange of the bowels. We missed Professor Dalpat Raj Purohit. I hope we will have him in future. We also thank Professor Dhamika Herath, Professor, University of Peradeniya and Visiting Fellow, University of Heidelberg. We are lucky to have with us Aritro Mojumdar, and we thank him for accepting our invitation to moderate the session in which Aisha Dee spoke. So I thank him also. Let me thank Dr. Swati Guha, Director, Institute of Language Studies and Research, for her guidance and all the support she offered to us. Let us also thank Professor Amitabh Das. Let us also thank the Department of Higher Education, Government of West Bengal, and the Higher Education Council. We also thank the Honorable Minister in charge, Department of Higher Education, Sri Bratto Bosu, for his kind approval for this collaborative venture. We also thank profusely Professor Dr. Kaushiki Das Gupta, the Vice Chairperson of Higher Education Council of the Government of West Bengal, for her presence here. We thank Dr. Pavan Malreddy for joining us from Germany and his wonderful suggestions. We will try to work on those suggestions. I'd like to thank Professor Sripati Tudu for doing, as he jokingly said last evening, what others don't do. But Sripati, this is really interesting. You made it available to the wider world. Okay, so those who could not come here, they could connect and listen to our eminent speakers. So thank you. I would also like to thank Dr. Asim Sorkar, Principal of Gaur Mahavidyalaya, for allowing Ambedkar Center for Social and Cultural Studies to collaborate with PSAGS. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the housekeeping staff, the electricians, sound system managers, the project operators. This conference would not have been possible without their kind support. So thank you. I would like to mention that PSAGS annual meet and conference bags are prepared by Missing Link Trust, an NGO which works for the rescue of missing girls. We thank them for their support. We also thank Dr. Niladri Vallabh and Dr. Nimasa Pandit, Associate Professors, Mankor College, and Dr. Akhil Ray, Assistant Professor, Malda Women's College, for their financial assistance. Let me also thank our learned audience for their patient hearing and wonderful discussion. We hope to see some of you next year. If I have missed anybody, sorry, this is not deliberate, so we end here. I hope the informal dialogue will continue. Let me also thank Professor Himadri Lahiri for for coming over here and listening to the discussions. Thank you, sir. So we end here, and the dialogue will continue. Thank you.
We can have 10 minutes of discussion for the question answer that we promised on the show. If you want, because some of them are interested for that.
Please.
For 10 না সেটাও হতে পারে।
আমরা তো কেউ দেখতে পাবো না, তাহলে আপনি এখানে এসে সবাই দেখতে পাবো, একটু কষ্ট করতে হবে আপনাকে। এইটাই।
স্যার কি ওই লাঞ্চ ব্রেকের আগে যেটা বলা হয়েছিল সেটা অনিন্দ স্যার রক্ষা করেছেন যে কারোর যদি কথা বলার থাকে। আচ্ছা একটু মাইক্রোফোনটা প্রফেসর আয়েশ
স্যার, আপনি বাউলের দীক্ষার উপরে কিছু বলবেন? কি রকম থাকে, কিভাবে হয়?
তাহলে ওটা নিয়ে দেবেন, ওটা স্যার বসে বসে
আসলে বললে একটু বেশি করে বলতে হয়, এটাই প্রবলেম। ভারতবর্ষে ইসলামেও পীরের দীক্ষা হানাফিদের মধ্যে প্রচলিত একটি প্রথা। এখানে উনি বলছিলেন যে ওর পরিবার বৈষ্ণব দীক্ষা নিয়েছে, একটু আগে আমরা কথা প্রসঙ্গে যাচ্ছিলাম। তাছাড়া শাক্ত দীক্ষা হয়, গুরুবাদ এটা একটা প্রচলিত প্রথা ভারতবর্ষে। এবং গুরুর দীক্ষা শুনেছি নেপালে মানুষের সংস্কৃতিকে ওরা দুভাবে ভাগ করে, দেবভাজু যারা দেবতার উপাসনা করে, আর গুভাজু যারা গুরুর উপাসনা করে। আমাদের উত্তর পূর্ব ভারতীয় ভাষার প্রথম আত্মপ্রকাশ যে চর্যাপদ, সেখানে দেবতা নেই, ঈশ্বর নেই, স্বর্গ নেই, নরক নেই, আছে ইহজীবন আর গুরুর প্রাধান্য। আশ্চর্য, বৌদ্ধ ধর্ম সম্পৃক্ত হয়েও মন্ত্র তন্ত্র নির্বাণকেও এরা অস্বীকার করছে, গুরু সর্বস্বতা। মুনিদত্ত সংস্কৃতে শোনা যায় অতিশাস্ত্রী জ্ঞান দীপঙ্কর শতচর্যাপদের একটা সংকলন করেছিলেন, তা থেকে 50টি পদ দিয়ে মুনিদত্ত সংস্কৃতে টিকা করেছিলেন। ব্যাখ্যা করে একটা জায়গায় সন্ন্যাসদ্য বলেও তিনি থেমেছেন, তিনি বলেছেন গুরু মুখ থেকে এটা জেনে নিতে হবে, শেষ অথরিটি গুরু। শৈবতন্ত্রে একটা কথা আছে, বৈষ্ণবতন্ত্রেও একটা কথা আছে, এইটা বলে আমি দীক্ষাটা বলবো, তাহলে বোঝা যাবে। শিব যদি রুষ্ট হয় বা কৃষ্ণ রুষ্ট হয়, গুরু রক্ষা করতে পারে, কিন্তু গুরু রুষ্ট হলে শিব বা কৃষ্ণ রক্ষা করতে পারে না। ভাববাদী এই গুরুবাদ থেকে বাউলদের মধ্যে আরেকটি কথা আছে, একটু আগে সঙ্গের কথা বলছিলেন, গুরু রুষ্ট হলে সাধুরা রক্ষা করতে পারে। এখন অনেক জটিলতা আছে এই দীক্ষা ইত্যাদি নিয়ে। প্রচলিতভাবে একজন প্রাপ্তবয়স্ক নরনারী এই মতের যে কারোর কাছ থেকে দীক্ষা নিতে পারে, কিন্তু অনেক রকম জটিলতা আছে। আমরা দুজন গুরুর কথা বৈষ্ণব বা শাক্ত ঐতিহ্যে পাচ্ছি, দীক্ষাগুরু, শিক্ষাগুরু। এখানে তারপরও পাওয়া যাচ্ছে ভেগ বা সন্ন্যাস, তার গুরু আলাদা। ভেগ বা সন্ন্যাস অন্য গুরু দেয়। ব্যাসামের যারা আজীবকদের ইতিহাস পড়েছেন তারা দেখেছেন, নিচু জাতে যারা জন্মায় তাদের তো কাস্ট আইডেন্টিটি পরিত্যাগ করার উপায় নেই, সন্ন্যাস দিয়ে তারা জাপ করত। অর্থাৎ গুরুর দীক্ষায় জাত বা অপ্রীতিকর যে বৃত্তিতে আবদ্ধতা তা থেকে মুক্ত হওয়া যায়। বৈদিক বা অর্থোডক্স ঐতিহ্যে অব্রাহ্মণের ভেগ বা সন্ন্যাস নেই। আপনারা জানেন বিবেকানন্দকে ব্রাহ্মণ্য শঙ্করপন্থীরা কখনো গুরু হিসাবে মেনে নেয়নি। আমেরিকা থেকে তার চিঠিগুলো দেখবেন। অর্থাৎ এখানে গুরু কে হবে গুরুত্বপূর্ণ। আমাদের এখানে বৈষ্ণব বা লৌকিক ক্ষেত্রে দেখা যায় ধর্মীয় জমিদারি, গুরুর ছেলে বা পরিবারের কেউ গুরু হয়, যেমন মতুয়া ঐতিহ্য, যেমন কর্তাবাচা ঐতিহ্য। বাউল ঐতিহ্যে গুরুর ছেলে বাউলও হয় না, গুরুও হয় না। এখানে বৌদ্ধ ঐতিহ্যটা যদি অগ্রজ পথিক এই সাধনা জানেন, তিনিই দীক্ষা দিতে পারেন। হিন্দু মুসলমানকে, নর নারীকে যে কোনো কিছু দীক্ষা দিতে পারেন। বৈষ্ণবরা ব্রাহ্মণ্য ধর্মের সঙ্গে একটা আপোষ করেছে, দীক্ষাগুরু হবে ব্রাহ্মণ, শিক্ষাগুরু হবে অব্রাহ্মণ। আপনি জানেন যে পরবর্তীকালে রঘুনাথ ভট্ট যখন বৈষ্ণব স্মৃতিকে রক্ষা করছে, এমনকি তুলসীদাস রামচরিত মানসে কিন্তু বর্ণাশ্রম রক্ষার কথা বলছে, এবং বৈষ্ণব স্মৃতিতে বর্ণাশ্রম ফিরে আসছে। এখানে কিন্তু বর্ণাশ্রম লঙ্ঘিত হবে সব সময়, এবং দুজন গুরু বড় ফ্যাশনেবল, একজনই গুরু। শুধু শুধু সন্ন্যাস যদি কেউ দেয়, অবশ্যই তিনি সন্ন্যাস দেবেন। ভেগধারী গুরু ছাড়া লালনের ভেগের গাহান পাওয়া যায়, এবং ভেগ তার চমৎকার। শুনেছি আগেকার দিনে, আমি একটু বড় করে বলছি যদি কিছু মনে না করেন, কালান্দাররা চমৎকার করে বলতো, না হাম হিন্দু হয়েঙ্গে না হাম মুসলমান, হাম তো কালান্দার হই। তার একটা গাছের তলায়ও 3 রাত্রির বেশি থাকবে না। ব্যক্তিগত সম্পদ দরবেশ আর পক্ষী সঞ্চয় করে না। এখন তারা কি করত, সর্বকেশ বিসর্জন দিত, ভুরুটা অব্দি কাঁপিয়ে ফেলত। জন্মের পর যা জন্মেছে সবকিছুকে পরিত্যাগ করব, জাত কুল গোত্র। লালন চমৎকার করে বলেছে, কুল গেলে না পাই হরি, কুল বিসর্জন না দিলে হরি পাওয়া যায় না। সুতরাং একজনের কাছে দীক্ষা শিক্ষা যা কিছু একজনই গুরু হয়, কিন্তু এই গুরু 4 জন। এই সাধনার 4টা স্কুল। পূর্ণদাসের একটা গান আছে, তোরা ভালো করে পড়গা গুরুর স্কুলে। লালনের গান আছে, গুরুর সহজ প্রেমের স্কুলে পড়ো। 4টা স্তর আছে, স্থূল, সাধক, প্রবর্তক, সিদ্ধ। 4 স্তরের গুরু 4 জন। স্থূলের গুরু দেহটি যে জন্ম দিয়েছে সেই মাতা পিতা। বিবর্ত বিলাস বলে বাজারে একটি মূল্যবান বই আছে, বহুজন ব্যবহার করে। এখানে ভয়ঙ্কর একটি প্রশ্ন তুলেছে। তন্ত্রের যে গুরু বন্দনা লালন ব্যবহার করেছে, পরিষ্কার বলেছে, নবী খোদাও সে হয়। এই গুরু শুধু নবী নয়, খোদাও তিনি হন, চৈতন্য গুরু রূপেই আসে। বৌদ্ধদের সাধনায় বৈষ্ণবতায় কৃষ্ণ আলাদা, জীব কৃষ্ণ ভেদ আছে, এখানে অভেদ। কৃষ্ণের সাধনা করতে করতে কৃষ্ণের সমরূপত্ব হয়, নবীর সাধনা করতে করতে নবুয়ত প্রাপ্ত হয়। অর্থাৎ নবী খোদাও সে হয়, গুরু সর্বস্বতা। এবং এই মানুষ গুরুতে নিষ্ঠা, এইটা একটা বড় কথা। কিন্তু যে কথা গোপন তারা করে, প্রচলিত সমাজ মানবে না। 4টি স্তরে 4 জন গুরু। দ্বিতীয় স্তরে এই তত্ত্ব শিক্ষা দেয়। কথায় এই সাধনার কিছু হয় না। বিবর্ত বিলাস একটা কথা বলেছে, জ্ঞান অঞ্জন শলাকা দিয়ে চোখটা খুলে দেয়। এই তন্ত্রের গুরু বন্দনা সবাই মেনে নিয়েছে। কানে মন্ত্র দিলে চোখটা কিভাবে খুলে? আমাদের শিল্প সংস্কৃতিতে সাঁতার দেখে শিখতে হয়, গাড়ি চালা দেখে শিখতে হয়, কাপড় বোনা দেখে শিখতে হয়। এই সাধনায় কথা নেই, দেখে শিখতে হয়। অদ্যাপিও করে ক্রীড়া সেই শ্যামরায়, কোন কোন ভাগ্যবানে দেখিবারে পায়। এটা বিজ্ঞান দেখিয়ে শেখানো হয়, তাহলে দেখাতে হবে। একটা সময় আশ্চর্য, দেহ সাধনার গুরু, নারী পুরুষের একটি মিলিত সাধনার ধারা আছে, সেখানে পরিচালক গুরু নারী। স্ত্রী গুরু, এই শব্দটার অন্তর্নিহিত অর্থ হচ্ছে স্ত্রী গুরু। সাধনা তিনি পুরুষকে শেখাবেন। কিছুদিন আগে সাধন কমল চৌধুরীর বই পড়ছিলাম, তান্ত্রিক বুদ্ধিজমের ডাকিনী তন্ত্রের গুরুদের কথা বলছিলেন। এরাই দীক্ষা দেয়। বিচিত্র সাধনা আছে, যে সাধনায় এরা সিদ্ধ হতেন, একক সাধিকা। এবং পরকীয়া সাধনা নারী গুরু ছাড়া কেউ দিতে পারে না। সাধনার একটি স্থানে স্ত্রী গুরু, নারী গুরু সাধনার পরিচালিকা হবে। সুতরাং দীক্ষা সব ঠিক, কিন্তু এক একটি স্তরে গুরু ঠিক করে দেবে তিনি সাধনা শেখাবেন। এটা যুগল সাধনা। এবং তারা মনে করে পরক্রিয়া কথাটার অর্থ খুব পরিষ্কার। দুর্লভ সার বলে রচনের একটি বই আছে, আমরা এডিটও করেছি ওই পুঁথিটা। পরকীয়া মানে ভারতীয় সাহিত্য তত্ত্বে অন্যের স্ত্রী। টলস্টয় তো ঠাট্টা করে তার বইয়ে বলেছে যে বুর্জুয়াদের সমস্ত সাহিত্য অন্যের স্ত্রীকে নিয়ে পালিয়ে যাওয়া এবং প্রেম করা, এই একটি বিষয়, আর তো কোনো বিষয় নেই। পরকীয়া বলতে যে নারী সন্তানের জন্ম দিতে চান না। দেহ মিলন 2 ধরনের, পুত্রার্থ, সন্তানের জন্মের আগে আমি যে বলেছি রাষ্ট্র এবং ধর্ম এটাকে বাধ্য করেছে। অন্যটা সুখার্থ। এই সুখার্থের বিচিত্র একটি সময় আছে, এগুলো গোপন, তার দেহতত্ত্ব আলাদা। মহাসুখকে চর্যাপদ পড়তে গিয়ে আমি চমকে উঠি। 4 আর্য সত্য, যে ধর্মের মূল কথা, দুঃখ বা দুঃখ নিবারণ, নৈরামণি কণ্ঠে লইয়া মহাসুখে রাতি পোহাই। সেখানে মহাসুখের কথা কিভাবে আসছে, তাই না? তাহলে এই জীবনে এই মহাসুখ কোথাও আছে। মানুষ, তার দেহ বড় বিচিত্র, এই দেহে বহু অসম্ভব করা যায়। দেবতারাও মানুষ হতে চায় এই কারণে এই দেহে এই মহাসুখকে আস্বাদন সম্ভব। সুতরাং সেই গুরুই গুরু, যিনি শিক্ষা দীক্ষা দিয়ে এইটা শেখাবে। আমি একটু ছড়িয়ে বললাম, কারণ গুরুর কাছে দীক্ষা এটা প্রচলিত আমাদের ভাববাদী ধর্মে, ইসলামে আছে, হিন্দু আছে। এই তো আমার শোনা কথা এইটুকু।
স্যার, আপনি যা বললেন সেখানে মানুষ এবং মনুষ্যত্বের জয়গানের কথা আমরা পাচ্ছি বাউলদের বিভিন্ন লেখায়। আমি বলছি মনুষ্যতর যারা প্রাণী বা জীব আছেন তাদের নিয়ে বাউলদের কি কোনো মানে কথাবার্তা কি সেটা জানার একটু ইচ্ছে আর কি।
দেখুন, আমি বাউলদের সব কথা জানি না। আমার খুব লিমিটেড একটা জগৎ, আমি যাদের সঙ্গে মিশেছি, ঘনিষ্ঠতা আছে, তাদের কথা বলতে পারি। মুসলমান বাউল কখনো প্রাণী মাংস খায় না, কখনো প্রাণী হত্যা করা যায় না, গুরুর নিষেধ। আলোচনা তারা করবে না, গুরুর নিষেধ। আমি এক সময় বাউল মেডিসিন নিয়ে কেন্দ্রীয় সরকারের একটা প্রজেক্ট করেছিলাম। বাউলরাও উনানি বা আয়ুর্বেদের মতো চিকিৎসা করে, গাছটা তোলে না, মাটি খুঁড়ে শিকড়টা কেটে দেয় কিছুটা, গাছকে বাঁচিয়ে রাখে। কিন্তু বৌদ্ধ অহিংসার অতিরেক নেই। প্রচলিত ভাবে তারা আরেকটা কথা মনে করে, বিপজ্জনক কথা। একই সত্তা, লালনের গান আছে, আপনারা জানেন। অখিলুদ্দিন ফকির বলে একজনের গান শুনে বিদ্যাসাগর কাঁদতেন, তার জীবনীতে লেখা আছে। আমরা তো প্রচলিত ব্রহ্মতত্ত্বের কথা বলি। একই সত্তা জগৎ রূপে পরিণত হয়েছিলেন। তা লালন বলছেন, যিনি গৃহস্থ তার ঘরে তিনি চোর হয়ে চুরি করছেন, পুলিশ হয়ে ধরছেন, বিচারক হয়ে বিচার করছেন। এ নাচারি কই নে, থাকি চুপে চাপে, সংসার থাকবে না, তাই না? সার্বিক অহিংসা। আবার এটা দেখেছি প্র্যাগম্যাটিজম। একজন আমার পরিচিত, তার টিউবারকুলোসিস হয়েছিল, সে কখনো মাংস খায় না, মাছও খায় না, নিরামিষ খায়। কিন্তু তখন দেহটাকে রক্ষা করতে হবে। আর কোরআনের একটা অদ্ভুত কথা আছে, নিচুতলার লোকেরা জানে, জীব জীবের আহার। জীব কটা থেকে দেহ পুষ্ট হয়, কিন্তু রক্তপাত না করে যদি বেঁচে থাকা যায় সেটা ভালো, কিন্তু খুব আপেক্ষিক। এরা শরীয়ত বলে, একটা চরম সিদ্ধান্ত, তা থেকে ফ্ল্যাকচুয়েট না করেই শরীয়ত, না করেই বৈদিকতা। সব সময় এটা আপেক্ষিক। প্রচলিত ভাবে মানুষের হিংসা করা, জীবের হিংসা করা, কাউকে হত্যা করা, আঘাত করা, তারা মনে করে এটা অধর্ম। এইটুকু শুনেছি আমি আর কি।
ধন্যবাদ।
একটা সময় বোধহয় নেই, পরে
এমনি কথা বলে
হ্যাঁ।
বোঝা যাচ্ছে যে কথা শেষ হওয়ার নয়, এবং সেটাই হওয়া উচিত। এটাই বলছিলেন, মুর্শিদও বললেন যে ডায়ালগ চলবে, আমাদের কথাবার্তা চলবে। স্যারকে আমরা আবার পাবো, স্যারের সঙ্গে কথা শুনবো, আবার প্রশ্ন উঠে আসবে, আলোচনা হবে। আজকে এখানে শেষ করছিলেন।
আমরা প্রথা ভেঙেছি, কন্ট্রোলিং নোটের পরে
হ্যাঁ, সেটা তো প্রথমেই বললাম যে যেহেতু অনিন্দ স্যার কথা দিয়েছিলেন যে লাঞ্চ ব্রেকের পর স্যারের সঙ্গে কথা বলা হবে, সেজন্য আমরা ফিরে এলাম। আর স্যারেরও অনেক বলার আছে, আমাদেরও অনেক শোনার আছে, আমরা নিশ্চয়ই ভবিষ্যতে শুনবো।
সবারই
আবার
আমার মতো বয়স হয়, তাহলে অনেক বেশি কথা বলতে সুযোগ পাবো।
এটা হচ্ছে আশির বচন, একদম শেষ হলো মানে কনক্লুডের ওরকম করে নয়, একদম আশির বচনে। সত্যি মানে এটা আমাদের আরো বেশি প্রয়োজন। নমস্কার স্যার, আরো কৃতজ্ঞ রইলাম আমরা সবাই।